Yeah, welcome everybody. Marijuana Times show for November 17th, 2017. I'm your host, Joe Klare. Of course, you can find me and many other great writers over at marijuanatimes.org. All the latest in the marijuana community and industry, all the news and opinion you need. Community and industry. Go check it out. marijuanatimes.org. Share those stories. Plus, you can find these videos over there as well. And you can share those. They're on our YouTube page. Go subscribe there, the Marijuana Times. Search that on YouTube. Facebook, it's the Marijuana Times as well. Very easy. Go check it out. Very easy to share. Spread the truth about cannabis. Stuff we're talking about today stories include being green in the marijuana industry, about a company called High Sierra dispensary bags, and the very interesting things they are doing. Also, the truth behind the quote-unquote first marijuana overdose death that's making a lot of play in the news. Also, regulators in California released emergency rules for retail cultivation and sales. They're supposed to kick off things January 1st. I don't know, time's running out. And they seem to be scrambling. We'll talk about all that coming up. First, I want to tell you that the Marijuana Times show is brought to you by NatureSideCannabis.com. If you're a cultivator, you're looking for organic, all-natural pesticides for your grow, you want to pass regulations in places like California and Colorado and Oregon and Washington. Maybe you need help passing regulations. NatureSideCannabis.com. Check them out. Also, you don't want to sell your customers, whether it be dispensaries for medical use or retail use, retail shops. You want to sell them tainted cannabis. Cannabis with horrible chemicals and the things that are just you've seen the stories in the news. Obviously, cannabis full of chemicals that make it harmful to use. NatureSideCannabis.com. You can eliminate all that. Don't worry about that. All natural, organic, pesticide. Proud sponsor of the Marijuana Times show. First story. What was the transition I was using? To the news. No, I still don't like that. I'll say that here's the first story. It's more boring, but it doesn't get on my nerves as much. It's from marijuanatimes.org. Being green in the marijuana industry, High Sierra dispensary bags. It's an interesting story about an interesting company. Mike Greenfield is one of the founders of High Sierra. He got tired of the standards in the industry. He decided to make his own company to make cannabis packaging in a 100% environmentally friendly way. His factory uses 100% clean, renewable wind power energy. One day he just decided that he was going to do something about the lack of good, recyclable, reusable bags in the industry. So that's what he did. He said he sat down, he got a piece of paper, began brainstorming ideas, and he came up with the idea that the first thing you need is the packaging. So the most important part, the material that you're going to use. You want a green material. What they do is they use sugar cane. They use that to make plastic. They also have new technology that Mike told us about that involves making it recyclable as well. You can check out that story at marijuanatimes.org, obviously. And Mike is also at the marijuana business big expo going out in Las Vegas, the biggest in the world apparently. I've seen some pictures on Facebook and stuff. It's huge. You need a big map just to get around and see what you're doing. So if you're all out there in Las Vegas, hello. Thanks for watching. So go check out that interesting story on marijuanatimes.org. The thing about it is, since marijuana is a new industry, they can do things different. If you want to do things in an environmentally friendly way, then you can do that because you're starting from scratch. You're not building on anything. You're not renovating anything. These are all new companies doing new things. So go check them out, marijuanatimes.org. Great story over there. This next story is from the Washington Post, WashingtonPost.com. As I said, you may have heard news about the first marijuana overdose death. This is from, like I said, the Washington Post. A case reported about the seizure and death of an 11-month-old after exposure to cannabis has prompted headlines about, quote, the first marijuana overdose death, end quote, this week, except that's not what the doctors meant. Thomas Knapp, he's author of the report, which is a case report, it's not a study of any kind. He's now director of medical toxicology at St. Luke's University Health Network in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He said, quote, "We are absolutely not saying that marijuana killed that child." Knapp co-authored the report with Christopher Hoyt. He explained that the doctor simply observed this unusual sequence of events, documented it, and alerted the medical community that it was worth studying a possible relationship between cannabis and a child's cause of death, myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart muscle. Now, before I continue, to be fair, I'm all for research. If you want to do studies or whatever about the a possible connection with heart problems, or that marijuana may exacerbate heart problems, that's fine. Study away and research away. But like someone says later in the story, and we'll get to in a second, stuff like that leads to, or stories like this lead to headlines that say things like the first marijuana overdose death. The observations appeared in the August edition of the journal Clinical Practice and Cases in Emergency Medicine. As I said, it's a case report, which is significantly different from a scientific study or research report that can be used to establish a causal relationship. Spokesman for Denver Health wrote an email that Hoyt would not be available for an interview. Report states that the child experienced, quote, "an unstable motel living situation," and the parents admitted to drug possessions, including cannabis. Knapp said the authors urged parents to be vigilant and keep cannabis out of reach of children. The report recommends, quote, which I also agree with, and most reasonable people do. In states where cannabis is legalized, it's important that physicians not only counsel parents on preventing exposure to cannabis, but to also consider cannabis toxicity and unexplained pediatric myocarditis and cardiac deaths as a basis for urine drug screening in this setting. Now, this story doesn't say whether or not the child was tested for cannabis. If the child was positive for cannabis, then it's a worthwhile thing to look into. But you have to make the leap from, hey, the parents had cannabis, and hey, this kid died from cannabis. There has to be a bridge there. You just can't go from one to the other. But like I said, having said that, yes, study away. You want to study because, in a lot of people, marijuana does increase heart rate. Maybe that'll lead to, maybe if they have an underlying heart problem, that could exacerbate it. And if so, we want to know that. We absolutely want to know that. So go study it. But don't go putting up headlines that say, oh, marijuana's killing people now. Sorry. You better stop smoking it. You're going to die. No. Not even close. Last but not least, from thepressdemocrat.com, this is an Associated Press story. California released long-awaited rules Thursday that will govern the state's emerging legal marijuana industry, while potentially opening the way for large-scale cultivation that some fear could strangle small farm growers. The thicket of emergency regulations will allow the state to begin issuing temporary licenses for growers, distributors, and sellers on January 1st. That's when recreational sales will officially become legal in California. The new rules provide a regulatory roadmap for business operations, from licensing fees to establishing guidelines for testing, growing, and distribution of marijuana in what is projected to be a $7 billion economy, the nation's largest. Regulations, as I've said before, they're planning on the first year issuing over 11,500 retail licenses. It's going to be 11,500 stores in California where if you're 21, you can just walk in and buy marijuana. Think about that for a second. Let that sink in, as people are now fond of saying for some reason on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. They make a post and then at the end they say, let that sink in. I don't need to be told that. I can let things sink in on my own. I'm a grown man. I'm an adult. The regulations have been in development for many months and in some cases cover familiar ground. The state will issue temporary licenses to growers and retailers, provided they have a local permit to open for business. Other changes appear significant, according to the Press Democrat, according to AP. The state has been trying to determine what should be the appropriate size limit on cannabis farms. One time, 4 acres was under consideration, but preliminary information from the state earlier this week indicated a maximum of 1 acre, but the regulations issued on Thursday did not include that language, instead placing limits on only certain medium-sized growers' licenses Beyond those, quote, there is no limitation for the other categories of licenses. Ezekiel Allen, executive director of the California Growers Association, which is an industry group, said the rules appeared to allow large businesses to obtain as many licenses as they could afford, opening the way for vast cannabis growers that could threaten the viability of small farms along the backbone of the state industry. Now I understand they're worried about large growers and what's going to happen there, and that's fine. But what they really need to worry about, what the problem is down here a little farther. According to regulations, annual fees for cultivation licenses could be nearly $80,000. Now, I don't know. I don't have $80,000 laying around. Now, obviously, people going into business will, get investors and maybe take out loans and whatever. But that's the barrier to small growers and the people who don't have resources. It's not that, you're allowed to buy as much as you want. McDonald's is allowed to open as many restaurants as they want. But if the barrier to entry is too high for smaller people and the regulations are too much for smaller businesses to get in the business, they're not going to be able to compete with McDonald's. That's why big corporations love rules. They love regulations. They can afford that stuff. But smaller, more nimble, more responsive, more innovative, smaller companies, they don't have a chance because they're barred. Last year, of course, voters legalized recreational use of marijuana in California. Obviously, the massive market, the biggest market for legal marijuana that's going to exist in the United States is going to exist in California. So good for them. They still got a long way to go. January 1st is coming up quick. They're issuing emergency regulations. They're scrambling. And there's going to be a problem for a while. They're already talking about oversupply. People are going to grow too much, which means a lot of it's going to flow out of state to the black market in other states, and they're going to complain about that. And that could give the federal government reason to come in and shut things down. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. It's a whole big thing. And of course, the Marijuana Time Show will follow all of that. Share these videos, like them. Thank you to NatureSideCannabis.com, organic, all-natural pesticides for your cannabis grows. They're a proud sponsor of the Marijuana Time Show. Thanks, everybody. Another great week of shows. We will see you next week. I'm Joe Klare. Go check out marijuanatimes.org, and we'll see you next time.